What's up, my friend? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the newest library from Orchestral Tools called TIDES in collaboration with Rachel Portman. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you probably expect me to do a review of this library. This, for me, matches a lot of the aesthetic that I personally prefer when it comes to composing. When I, saw this library on VI Control, I went on the OT website. I saw things like lyrical legato, chamber orchestra, passionate vibrato. Like that sort of stuff really speaks to me as a composer and also a melodic writer in many ways. So I was like, this really matches what I would like in a sample library, and I selfishly wanted to create a strings library for a long time. Just never had really the chance or really the motivation to do it, but if I had to put something together, this would be sort of a similar aesthetic that I would personally be going for. But it's so cool that they came out with this, and I'm usually not the type to really go for collaborations in terms of sample libraries, but this one was really right up my alley. So let's just get right into it. If at any point you want to check out like my full recommendations for the libraries that I use on a regular basis for my personal writing style, which is again the more romantic side of things, more ballads, but also things like adventure, fantasy, things like that, I'd invite you to grab my sample library buyer's guide down below. It's completely free, and you can use it as a guide for your next sample library purchase in case you're curious about my thoughts on a certain library and how much it might be. I've also included the prices and also how I use those libraries personally. So again, it's super comprehensive, and it's the first link down below in the description if you want to grab that as my thank you for watching this video today. So with that being said, let's take a look at what this library offers. So when we open up the library, we see it categorized in a few different sections. We have chamber strings, so we have a full chamber string orchestra. We also have solo strings, violin and cello. Would have been nice if they had the viola in there as well. And then we have solo woodwinds, quite fully fleshed, I'd say. You got the core four, right? Flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon, and then they also added in soprano sax and English horn and alto flute in there, which is pretty cool. Two solo brass instruments, French horn and trombone, and then some character soloists as well. These are sort of like additional sort of percussion related instruments or string instruments that have more of a plucky sound. So for me, I care more about the first four, because that's just sort of the instrumentation that I personally prefer. But with that being said, let's kind of get into it and start with the chamber strings. And we're just going to hear all the articulations for the violins one, but then from then on out, we'll hear just the legato because the articulations are pretty consistent for all the different instrumental sections and soloists. So let's start with the violins A6. And I'll go to the performance view here so we can see the articulations and the ranges of the playable range. Let's have a listen to the legato here first from the violins. Right, so just a beautiful sound. And the fact that it's a chamber section allows us to really hear the detail in those performances. Think about, a symphonic section, like let's say Spitfire symphonic strings. You get a very full, big, lush sound, whereas in this case, it's much more detailed, sort of akin to Spitfire chamber strings, for example. Also kind of true to the OT recording setup, it's a very bright sound. You get very, very high audio fidelity, so the absolute quality is beautiful. I also like, in terms of the legato, how it's not overly portamento or like slidey, right? You don't get huge slurs between the notes, which is good because it sort of, to me at least, meets that middle ground. The legato is not super fast, where it feels like the players don't really care about the transition, but it's also not overextended to the point where you feel like you couldn't use that same transition like twice in a row, or you'd have to only use it for very big emotional moments, if that makes sense. And then in terms of the vibrato, it's passionate, it's romantic, but it's not overly hyper romantic, right? So again, it's that nice sweet spot for me at least, between passionate but also controlled. And there's an innate musicality in every note or sustain that I'm playing, which really lets the line sing. Like I feel like this is one of those inspiring libraries where you could play melodies and then you can simply just let the line create itself, which is really cool. And I believe there are two dynamic layers for the legato. So I'm guessing like below the center, it's like the lower dynamic, and then above it's the higher dynamic. And I believe for the sustains, we have three dynamic layers. So there's a little bit more flexibility there, or more dynamics for the sustains themselves. But for the legato, I think there were just two dynamic layers. So let's just hear the sustains and the other articulations here. All right, beautiful. So those are sort of the workhorse articulations, right? We got shorts, we got longs, and yeah, just beautiful approaches there. Now let's move on to some unique articulations here. So we have something called synced rhythms, and you can see we have 4 different rhythms. The first one we'll just hear, and then we'll kind of hear the other ones as well. But these are synced to your host tempo, hence why it's called synced rhythms. So let's just hear this. Right, so you get some pretty different rhythms there, right? The fourth rhythm is just your standard like quarter notes or eighth notes, however they sampled it. But then you get some syncopation in the other rhythms, and it's cool because in terms of the way it's programmed, when you play subsequent notes after the first note, they're not necessarily lined up with the timing of the first note that you played. So you can have the same pattern, but just misalign slightly if you wanted to, or even have your subsequent note sort of start in the middle of a break that's happening in one of the rhythms. So essentially, it's not like locked into a certain steady pattern the entire time, which is kind of cool. So we have those synced rhythms. Let's hear some of these measured trills as well. And what's also really cool is like you can have one of these trills playing, but then shift to another one and hear that on a different note as well. So you can have different intervals playing at the same time. So we'll start with the whole tone ones here. Sorry, half tones, or half steps, I should say. Right, so you can hear how the bottom 2 notes I played were basically half steps, and then the minor thirds I was sort of playing on top. So it's cool, you can create some really cool chords that way. And then let's hear the measured trills down. Well, maybe we'll do a whole step or whole tone first. Right, just a beautiful effect all around. So I think it's a pretty cool thing. I guess this is pretty true to how Rachel Portman actually writes her music. Like she maybe uses some of these rhythms and measured trills and stuff in her music. Admittedly, I'm not I don't really know her catalog very well. I probably haven't watched too many of her films or the films that she scored. But again, the aesthetic I think is one that really rings true for the type of music that I personally write. Before we move on to the other sections and the legato, let's have a quick listen to the mic positions. So just like with most OT libraries in Sign, you can download the mic positions that you want. It can be all of 7 or 8 or however many they include, or just 1 or 2, however many you like. And I like that they also give you the option to select the basic kit of a sample library, which usually just includes the close and the tree mics. So basically a close position with detail and then a further one for the room sound. And I just downloaded them both. And each instrument essentially loads with a mix of both the close and the tree. Let's go back to the legato here and hear the close a little bit. Okay, let's hear the tree now by itself. And again, we'll hear both at the same time now. Right, so I think that blend is just really, really beautiful. If I had to choose one position to stick with for my entire life, it would probably be the tree. I think the way Orchestral Tools does their tree miking is just a great balance between detail and the room sound. But again, the additional close mic gives you a sense of intimacy, like you really feel like you're sitting with the players. So if you like that bit of detail and nuance in the sound, then that can give you that flexibility there. All right, moving on to the violas. Let's just make sure we've got our channels right here. Set it on channel 1. And now let's have a listen to the violas. So here we go. We're just going to have to listen to these legato. Very nice. Let's move on to the cellos now, celli. And I'll go back to the main view here. Okay. Beautiful. All right, now let's move on to the bass. So I like that here they sampled a solo bass. I think they could have categorized it under solo strings personally, but I don't actually think I have a good solo double bass in my collection in terms of the orchestral side with lyrical sustains or legato. So it's a very welcome addition, at least for my purposes. But let's have a listen. Yeah, very, very nice. Okay, so those are what they call the chamber strings with a soloist instrument. All right, now let's move on to the dedicated solo strings folder. Let's make sure this is actually on a different channel. Okay, let's have a listen here to the solo strings. So let's have a listen to the violin first here. Solo violin. Again, let's go through the different articulations and see how they sound here. So again, we have violin and we have cello. Okay, and these ones are without the measured rhythms or the trills and stuff like that. So here's the legato for the violin. Very nice. So just like a very, very sweet sound as we'd come to expect from the other sections as we heard. Very sweet vibrato and everything like that. All right, moving on to the cello. Let's have a listen to this one. All right. So yeah, if anything, if I had to nitpick on anything, I'd have two minor critiques. Number one is that the delay is quite evident in the legato patches, especially. I feel like when I'm playing, different legato notes, the delay feels like it's at least a couple hundred milliseconds, like 200, 300 maybe. It could be longer. I'm not really sure, but I sort of go into libraries knowing that I'll have to sort of readjust timings of notes and quantize later in the future anyway. So it's not a deal breaker by any means, but just know that if you're looking for a very playable library that allows you to play without any sort of delay, there is going to be delay built into this library. So just keep that in mind, especially for the legato. The other thing is that for the legato specifically, this library really sings well for slower passages, slower melodies. If you're going to play fast, you notice how sometimes the transitions can't really keep up super, super well. So you really want to give those transitions time to sing and really connect from note to note. There are definitely other libraries out there that excel in faster passages, and we'll actually, after we hear TIDES, we'll go into a couple other OT or orchestral tools strings to kind of compare. But for this library specifically, I tend to, or I would see myself using this for slower ideas to begin with. So just a little thing there, but beautiful solo strings for those melodic passages. I could definitely see it working well. And do keep in mind, these are single dynamic layers that are being recorded for the solo strings. So you prevent any sort of phasing between layers and creating that unnatural sound. All right, moving into the woodwinds, we've got, again, that complete collection of the regular orchestral sections or instruments. And then we also got a few other doublers as well. Let's start with the flute here and here, the legato. All right, those are the woodwinds. So for me, some standouts would be the flute and the bassoon, and the also flute as well. I just think they sing very, very lyrically, and I don't think they're over passionate. But I think the vibrato is very, very musical. The samples just make me feel very comforted and very. It just sounds very musical, very realistic, and there's a sense of emotion in there that it's very hard to capture in some other libraries. I think I've heard better oboes and English horns. My least favorite might be the clarinet, actually. I just find it a little bit flat. And I know a lot of libraries don't necessarily capture vibrato with the clarinet samples, but this one I just feel is slightly flat to me in terms of the performances. And especially when you're playing some larger intervals in the higher notes for the clarinet, those notes tend to pop out a bit more evidently, so it's a little bit more abrupt. The sax is actually really beautiful. I like how when you have those larger intervals for the higher notes, you also get that little slide there. So it's very jazzy in a way, right? It kind of gives you that idiomatic sound for those solo lines in jazz playing. So beautiful. And then the last legato patch we've got is from the French horn. So let's have a listen to that as well. And the trombone, as we'll see, only has sustains and the other articulations without legato. And the aesthetic is essentially to have it as a supporting instrument, whereas the French horn can be used more as a melodic instrument. So let's have a listen to the French horn first. Beautiful. And honestly, I'm really only interested in the piano side from the character soloists. OT shows all these different ones on on their official walkthrough, so have a listen to those if you're interested. But let's just hear the piano. I think it has a gorgeous, gorgeous sound. So it sort of specializes in the softer dynamics. Yeah, one library this piano reminds me a lot of is Spotlight Piano from Fracture Sounds, another one of my favorite piano libraries, in addition to Cine Piano. So that is TIDES essentially. Now let's quickly compare, in case you're wondering about the strings, how similar are they to other orchestral tools libraries? Let's have a quick listen to that. So I just pulled in a couple of patches from different libraries, from Patera's Vast Strings, which is known as having chamber strings, really good chamber strings as well. So let's start with the violins one here and have a listen to the legato here. Right. So just from those two articulations, I mean, the whispered legato obviously is a lot quieter there. So apologies if you had to turn up the volume, but essentially, these performances definitely sound a lot more still to me. Like they're more icy, whereas TIDES is a lot more warm, right? And there's more of that passionate aesthetic to it, whereas PVS sounds a lot more controlled in a way. And that's a different aesthetic. So you could actually use these in combination together, like TIDES plus PVS, depending on the vibe you want. If you want some non-vibrato samples, or at least something that's a little bit more contained, then PVS might suit you really nicely. Whereas if you want that burst of emotion, TIDES might be the better option there. Now let's have a listen to the first chair. So change the channel here again, and let's give a listen to the violin 1 legato. Right, so definitely a lot more contained there, and I had to turn the volume up there quite a lot as well. I think that was one nitpick that people had about PVS, is that it's a very quiet library, but let's see how about this expressive legato. Right, so that's another one of those patches where you don't want to play too quickly, because you don't want this sliding effect happening all over the place in quick succession. So playing a little bit slower with those melodic lines will definitely be the way to go to make the most out of these first chairs for sure, especially for the expressive legato, I should say. I think TIDES has a nice middle ground between being passionate, like having nice accentuated transitions, but like not overboard, right? So the other library I brought in here was Tallinn, and they also have choir, but also strings as well. They have chamber strings with legato and all this other stuff too. So let's just have a quick listen to the violins first. Here we go. Right, so definitely a lot stiller as well. Similar to that cool sound that you get with PVS in a way. I believe Tallinn was recorded in a larger church, if I'm not mistaken, so you definitely hear more of that resonance and reverb, natural reverb in the hall, in the room. So yeah, very, very nice. And then finally, I just wanted to bring in Berlin strings, because Berlin strings also have quite a smaller sections to begin with. So let's have a quick listen to that. So I'll bring in just the Berlin strings violins 1 here. Yeah, very nice. Berlin strings sounds a little larger to me compared to TIDES. Like it sounds like the section's slightly larger, even though it might not be the case. I don't actually remember the section size for these violins, but because it's a more fully fledged library dedicated to just the strings, there's different legato types, adaptive legato. There's those different legato transitions, right? Like you play hard or lightly, you get different lengths of transitions and stuff like that. But overall, the aesthetic is sort of similar to TIDES, but maybe with just a bit more of a fuller sound. So I think TIDES really gives you that chamber sound. And last but not least, let's hear the cellos, or the celli as well, from Berlin strings. And there we go. So yeah, you hear how when I press harder on the keyboard, we get more of that accentuated portamento almost slide transition between the two notes. So yeah, I think out of all of these, Talon and PVS definitely sound more characterful. Like those performances are a lot cooler, a lot less vibrato, give you a stiller sound. Whereas Berlin Strings has more of a classical sound that you might find similar to TIDES. So yeah, just all in all, a very beautiful library we've got here from TIDES. And it's not going to be your typical workhorse library. They do give you some standard articulations from the different sections. But I think where this library really does shine is in those lyrical, legato, melodic lines. And again, for me, this fits my aesthetic essentially perfectly. I love strings. I love woodwinds. And when it comes to brass, like writing melodies with brass, 9 times out of 10, I'm using the French horn. So OT and I are on the same page here when it comes to this sort of the aesthetic that I personally love. And yeah, just so cool that they're continuing to produce libraries that have different takes on different performance approaches, right? And different vibes, different collections of instruments. And yeah, it's just nice to see different composers in the industry working with the sample library companies to produce tools that they would love to use, but also for the general public as well. So thank you so much, OT, for sharing a copy with me for this review, for taking a look at the library. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know down below in the comments if there's a specific patch that you heard in this library that you like the most, one that really spoke to you that you're interested in picking up. And if so, you know, they share these as a la carte options. Just like with most other OT libraries in Sign, you can pick up just the one patch that you want for a low price, try it out for yourself, and then you can always get the rest of the library later if you wanted to. So that's a cool option. So I'd love to hear from you. What's a patch or two that really spoke to you in this video? Which one do you like the most? And of course, if you want to check out my sample library buyer's guide to see my regular recommendations, not just for, you know, strings and stuff, but for all the different orchestral sections and libraries from different companies, things that I would personally use on the daily, then I invite you to grab that down below in the description. Again, it's completely free. It's super comprehensive. I've also listed the pricing there and the utilities, so how I actually use the libraries. And again, you can just use it as a buyer's guide for your next sample library purchase in case you're curious about my thoughts on that library. So I want to thank you again for watching. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for checking this out. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Have a great one.